So again, thanks to everybody for coming out despite the downpour just before this rally. And we're going to have several, our whole series of phenomenal speakers here. They're going to be 5 minutes or less each, and that actually will be enforced by our enforcer, Angus. Where's Angus? There, okay. All the speakers, take note of the guy there with the orange sign waving. He'll be waving 2 minutes left, 1 minute left. And because we want to be on time, we're going to do a ring around the legislature at the end to encircle the government, to let them know we're closing in, that we expect action for this election. Our first speaker is somebody who has, he's the, actually the head, essentially, of the biggest First Nations conglomeration in the province, the Hulkaminum Treaty Group. Their chief negotiator is Robert Morales, and you would have seen him in the news battling on 10,000 various issues.
Activists. Give yourself a round of applause. Just wanted to make a few comments this afternoon. It's great that the sun came out and was shining down on this activity today. The issues of culture, for things like traditional canoes, transportation, traditional longhouses, traditional totem poles, and things of that nature. Food. In our territory, we see that as a result of mass logging that has been going on for so many years, that food is disappearing. No longer is there any available wildlife for our community members to be able to go and harvest. Art. So forests are an important component of the traditional territories of First Nations people. In our territory, and I come from Cowichan, just to the north of here, as part of that historic E&N land grant and the privatization of our territory, we have seen 98% of the old growth disappear. And whether it will ever return, I guess is something that hopefully future governments and future leaders will be able to develop a way to try and make that happen. The unleashing of the corporate interests that started with the E&N Railway and has continued on to today with Timber West and Island Timberlands and Hancock Timber Resources and the mass destruction of the forests that's going on. Not only old growth, as I say, there's no old growth left in our territory, but even second and third and even beyond that in terms of logging practices. So let us be dissatisfied. Let us be dissatisfied with complacency. Yeah. Let us be dissatisfied with the status quo. Let us be dissatisfied with immoral capitalism and corporations that only seek the bottom line. Let us be dissatisfied with governments that are selling us out. Yeah. There is a gathering storm. There is a gathering storm of people across British Columbia. There is a gathering storm of peoples across Canada. There is a gathering storm of people across nations. We are coming together. First Nations, Indigenous peoples are coming together and saying no more. There are whirlwinds of revolt that are taking place. We see it in the Idle No More movement. We see it in terms of international standards that are being set, and that First Nations and Indigenous peoples are turning to the international forum to help us. You're here. So the legitimacy of any government must be based on more than garnering the greatest number of votes. Yeah. The legitimacy of any government must be based on reconciliation. not merely the absence of tension, but the presence of justice. We cannot have unabashed capitalism, but we need sustainable management of forest and valuable resources. So ultimately, a good leader is not the seeker of consensus. A good leader is the molder of consensus. And so we need to see in this election a leader who will be able to build consensus amongst the various interests across the province. Someone who will be able to, in fact, lead us and not simply capitulate to those industries and those with the greatest amount of resources. So thank you very much.
Of the Chamber of Commerce and the local business community moving forward to say that we need these ancient forests for our local economy standing. So we have to give a great round of applause for somebody who really moved us forward on ancient forest protection through the business community.
A lot of people here today. It's great. Like Ken said, I've been with the Chamber of Commerce for about 12 years now in various positions. I also own and operate Soul Creek Lodge with my brother Tim. I just want to take this opportunity to thank those of you who helped prevent the logging in Avatar Grove with letters, petitions, and attending events like this. These efforts make all the difference in changing government policy. And without these efforts, I don't believe it would have been possible to save Avatar Grove. I would especially like to thank the Ancient Forest Alliance for their massive effort in generating the support and awareness, which has also had the effect of helping to rebrand Port Renfrew as the tall tree capital of Canada. The holistic approach which is taken by the AFA, I believe, is key to the success of such campaigns. By working with the Port Renfrew business community, about 95% of whom are tourism related, it was possible to show the value of old growth forests to our local economy for the foreseeable future with no loss of forestry jobs. They also organized fundraisers for the local community center, and info center, and helped generate maps showing people where to find the tallest trees in the world in our own backyard. Wow. I have little doubt more economic benefit has been realized locally from tourism since the start of the campaign in January of 2010 than would have been generated by cutting down the old growth forest. This was an investment in the community which will pay dividends for years to come, and was achieved simply by not destroying something. Also providing an easily accessible showcase for the beauty that is old growth forest. I've also seen firsthand how something like this has the potential to tear apart a community. Port Renfrew, with its population of 250 residents, has had to reinvent itself over the last 15 years, from a resource-based economy to a tourist-based one. And it shouldn't come as any surprise that opinions will differ between those who make their living from ecotourism and those who provide forestry products, which we all use. The controversy generated 100 print articles, numerous television news stories, and many more online articles, locally, nationally, and even internationally about Avatar groves, creating interest not only in the forest, but also in Port Renfrew as a destination. As much as tourism has benefited from this, I still believe the way forward is through involving and respecting forestry workers, First Nations, and ensuring livelihoods are not threatened and prevent an us versus them campaign. We all share a future. And a concern for how our forests are managed. This grove is and always should be a part of our heritage. I look forward to bringing my kids there as they grow. When concerns were raised about thousands of people visiting the grove, the AFA immediately began spearheading efforts to secure funding and permission from Pacheedaht First Nations and the provincial government to help protect sensitive ecosystems, building boardwalks, and allowing for better access and sustainability. Ideally, a park designation is the next logical step for this beautiful forest. But for the time being, the Port Renfrew Chamber of Commerce has volunteered to maintain the trails. If you've never been to Port Renfrew, you should come. And if you have, there's always more to discover. I thank you all again for your support, and have a great day.
Okay, our next figure, he's the one who started the campaigns to save old-growth forests on Vancouver Island when I was a small animal. It would have been about 1984, I think. We have Joe Martin of the Taloquiet First Nations, who's a master canoe carver, he's a band counselor, and he was the organizer of the very first protests to save old-growth forests on Vancouver Island, for Mears Island, just north by Tofino there. So we have Joe. Joe is like the Jedi master of ancient forests.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Hey. All right. My name is Joe Martin, and I'm from the Tlaoquet First Nations, and I have a little secret to share with you. But I grew up in the area of Clayoquot Sound as a very young child, with these little ones that are standing here. And at the time, the place was beautiful. It had so many resources, but of course, as I grew up, the place changed a lot. And one of the worst things that happened was the deforestation of Vancouver Island, and thereby reducing and destroying the resource of the salmon with fish farming and logging. And I have to say that we also need to be aware of what's being dumped in our oceans, which is a very important issue. You know, we flush our toilets and all the stuff goes down to right out of the ocean. We have to take care of that. I worked as a logger for 12 years, and I know very well what happened in the logging camps in the former days, until they were going to log on Mears Island back in 1984. Then I became their worst enemy, because I grew up with my late father. He taught me about being on the ocean and respecting nature. And you know, I have to say that one of the things I really appreciate about coming here is just looking at that totem pole across the way over there. And a lot of people that come to visit here in Canada, and even people that live here, didn't even know what those things were. Of course, our people did not have education as you know it, as the way you see it today. But our education began as soon as our mothers conceived our lives, and that did not stop until we died. And then the education is depicted in those totem poles. That's what it is, and that's why we had so many of them standing in front of our villages until the first Europeans came along with their Catholic teachings and so on and burnt them down. We have had the land that our people call our Hahusli. It's all of that, all the places that we have there. But the governments came along and then just left us with a reservation. And I take exception to that word. There are old village sites that existed a long time before the Indian Act ever existed. And it was the job of all of our houses in our villages that had these totem poles which depict the taking care of the land. And so the art that we have was one of the most important aspects to humanity, which are basically teachings of natural law. And you know, several years ago I did travel to Japan with my daughter Giselle Martin, who's here with me, and the fellow Dan Lewis, and we met with some Japanese corporations. And at the same time we came across a group kind of like this here and went to a rally like this, and there was a fellow there from Papua New Guinea. who had a very moving speech, and it really bothered me at what happened to him. And then I look at this photograph of what you have in front of us here, and that fellow showed us stuff like that, and he brought me to tears because he said that all of his people that used to make those world famous canoes, you've probably seen them many years ago, where men used to stand up and row with their leg with a big long paddle, and he said they cannot make their canoe anymore because of the destruction of the forests like that. And here, also in Vancouver Island and many of the native communities up here, I have learned how to carve canoes from my father. And people want me to come and carve canoes. I'm going to tell you, the first canoes, the first people that wanted me to carve a canoe was down there in Neah Bay, Washington. They wanted me to carve a canoe, and I went there, and I could not find a tree in their land. It was all like that, all clear cut. And so, you know, in my opinion, the forest companies should not touch one more stick of old growth. Absolutely not. If they want to keep foresting, they ought to manage the second growth. Manage it. We have, like I say, other concerns in our communities, and the next ones that are of a very big concern are the mining companies that want to open up a couple of mines in our area. And of course they were opened up by some of the logging roads that were there. And so the more logging roads that are open, it's crazy. They can't do that. I just cannot see how they can do that, and we can't leave it, the world in a better place for these young ones that are standing here with us today. They can't vote on this, but we can. And you know, years ago when my daughter was that little, I thought that it was going to just be a couple years, but here I am still, and now she's part of it. And I would just like to say thank you very much for coming here today, and I'm also very thankful to the Songhees whose land we are on.
And our next speaker is also with the Colloquiet First Nations. Her last name is the same as Joe Martin's. It's Giselle Martin. The reason why is because she's his daughter. And Giselle is a great role model as well for the people of Tofino, but for BC. She's taken more people to see old growth forest than anybody in this province now. Wow. For years. Like relentless stamina. Constantly bringing people to Mears Island to give them the old growth tour and the wild grocery walk tour. I brought my grocery bags, but but she wasn't there to gather the food, I guess. So we've got Giselle Martin from the Colloquiet First Nations, who's going to speak as well about her perspective.
Very happy to see you all today. Songhees Nation. Thank you, Songhees Nation. My family has been well known for canoe carving for many generations. In fact, our whole tribe. And we had a territory that had huge, beautiful, some of the most beautiful canoe trees. And a few weeks ago, I went with my father timber cruising, looking for a canoe log to carve into a canoe for one of our neighboring communities. And we looked and looked, and the best places that our family once managed are gone today. They were our intergenerational gardens. So we were going up steep slopes and looking, and we found one beautiful tree. But we sat down at the base of it and said, Dad, like, this tree won't be ready for another 8 generations. We need to keep it standing. On the West Coast here, there was a misconception that First Nations were just fish eaters. So we got the tiniest Indian reservations in Canada. But we used all of our lands. Every inch of land was managed by different families and cared for in a way that looked to the future for many, many generations. We had a responsibility to be respectful of every small plant, and large animal, the whales, everything that we gathered. It was very important that we show respect, and it's still very important today. We had a theory that even, if you were disrespectful, those spirit beings would go back to the spirit world. They wouldn't come back to this material plane to help us. And that, to me, is an explanation why we don't see the wolverine today. But some elders have spoken to me and said, as long as we can protect these forests, protect these lands, manage ourselves, and make sure that they're still here, we can relearn, because so many of our teachings come from our environment. We were taught by the plants themselves how to use them. We were taught by animals how to behave in this world. The otters remind us to take time to have fun in life. Yeah. Bears teach us to be respectful of each other's boundaries. The wolves teach us about keeping a balance. They're almost like a policeman of nature. There's all these teachings associated with all the animals. And today, some of our stories have been kind of, I don't want to say erased by residential school, maybe forgotten for a time, but we need to bring them back. And to bring them back, we need to have access to those lands, to those forests, to those animals. We need to be near them. Also, all of you who are here today, you come from different ethnicities. Maybe your roots, your ancestors came from different lands. But you all live here now, and I really want to honor your commitment. You're here today to commit to this land. Commitment to place is very important. It's part of our vision as well. We don't, eat up the land and move on. I don't want to move to Mars and start a new settlement there. I love this place. I want to be sometimes at home alone, we're struggling on and going to various meetings and activities, and it's easy to get discouraged about the whole state of the world and the different things going on. We need to reach down, reach into our roots. And out here, you can see we are a forest. We are many people of different generations here. But we are also interconnected with the soil in this land, the soil in this lawn right behind us, the trees all around us. And so I thank you today, because it's always been strengthening to come here and speak. And I want to thank Ken Wu, because he's invited me quite a few times. And every time I come here and I see your faces, it's very empowering. I take it home and it fuels me. I'd like to share just a short prayer. I'm learning my language right now, and it's one of the most beautiful things I've been able to do in my life. And my grandfather taught me this prayer. Why kash nas hatla pihatwe? Why kash nas hatla pihatwe? Slak klakwane sutit hatwe? Hatsi imsamaksti ha akwapin hatwe? Chama pislapin. Let us stand with honor, dignity, and respect. Empower us, Great Spirit.
Amen.
Okay, I just want to recognize, though, in this province, there has been one MLA who has just gone way farther than anyone else to battle it out to save old-growth forests. And he's here right now. It's actually Scott Fraser, right here, the Port Alberni. Really made the effort, so you have to give credit where credit's due, and in this province, Scott is the one who has really stuck his neck out on the old growth issue. So, and hats off to any other politicians who showed up today. I know I saw Murray Rankin was here, the MP. We've got a candidate, Susan Lowe, I believe, from the Esquimalt variety. Rob Fleming's here as well. So, nice, thank you all for coming out and support. So our next speaker is part of the Tree Hugger, Tree Cutter Alliance. It's Arnie Burkhoff. who's spoken again and again at our rallies for sustainability and for ancient forests and banning raw log exports of the Pulp, Paper and Woodworkers of Canada. He will be the national president of the union in just a couple months now.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Obviously, this is probably the single most important rally, I think, before the election. If we don't take care of our home, and that's the forest, and our jobs, and our kids, then at the end of the day, we will have nothing. We've got a government here that defines success as 1 in 3 logs exported, cut down the last of the old growth, destroy the environment, wreck the fisheries. If they think success, then let's move to 100%. Let's destroy everything, but I don't think anybody here wants that. Absolutely. We need to work hard. If you do nothing, you're going to get nothing. This is great to see everybody here. We're going to stand with the environmentalists, First Nations, everybody stand on everybody's shoulders, and we're going to make it better. We're going to get a government in there that changes this so that young people have jobs, our forests look like they should be, they become restored. All these things we can do. We just need a government that's committed to do it, and we need everybody out there to say, we're going to make it happen. If you don't make things better, then you're complicit in making them worse. So we're going to make things better. Hopefully we get a change. Well, we will get a change of government, and the new government will listen to every one of us out here. If you destroy your home, and the forest is a home for a lot of people, then let's face it, you've destroyed everything. So as the Pulp, Paper, Woodworkers of Canada, we're going to work with the environmental groups, First Nations, to see that we all work together, and that healthy forests are important, forest jobs are important. I want young people to be able to stay in their communities on this island, get an apprenticeship, get a job like I did. So let's work hard to move towards second growth. We need to move towards logging that. So it's just fabulous to see you guys here. And again, the Pulp, Paper and Woodworkers of Canada is going to be there. Thank you very much, you guys.
So our next speaker is a mentor of mine. She has organized the largest civil disobedience movement in Canadian history, the Movement for Clackwood Sound. She's been arrested more times than anybody that I know of. Everything in the whole spectrum, from blockading roads, organizing movements, markets campaigns and initiatives, and negotiations. We've got the superstar, the rock star of the ancient forest movement, Valerie Lanier from Forest Ethics.
All right, well, there might be some other people who've been arrested more times than me, but we're not going to make a contest, are we? All right, so I want to thank Ken for organizing this over and over again, the Sangis for allowing us to hold this rally on their territories, and to the First Nations, whose generosity has been incredible towards us. So thanks. We'll try and keep this short because we've got a Ring-Around-the-Legislature to do, but I think that what we need today is imagination. It's not for lack of information that things are going awry. It's not because we don't know what we could possibly do. It's because there's a poverty of imagination. It's just holding us back. So I think that in this crowd today, we've got people who can imagine. Now I'm going to ask you a couple questions. Can you imagine getting 3 times more job per cubic meter cut in this province? Yeah! That's right. And if we've got as many jobs in this province as they get in Ontario per cubic meter cut, we could afford to log half as much and have more jobs than we currently have. Can you imagine that every piece of paper has to have 50% recycled content? Can you imagine that? That's right, because if we have 50% recycled content in our paper, totally easy, very practical, then we can afford to log half as much forest. And we'll have more jobs in the milling and the recycling industry. That's the way we get solutions. Can you imagine having houses that are a reasonable size instead of McMansions, so that we don't need to have as much living in? Can you imagine key places in our province that are biodiversity rich, that have spirit bears and grizzly bears and mountain caribou and woodland caribou, protected because they are biodiversity and carbon rich? Can you imagine that? That's right. We can imagine imagine that? Because when we can afford to log less, we can afford to protect more. That's the way we have the imagination in not impoverishing us, but enriching us in so many beautiful ways. Can you imagine also if environmental rights were entrenched in our Constitution so that we could not destroy the environment without contravening a very basic aspect of what we need as rights to live? The environment should be entrenched in as a right in our Constitution. You know why you can imagine that? Because you are beautiful people. Because you have the immenseness of generosity in your spirit to care about things beyond yourself. That, as Ken said earlier, is what makes a movement. That's what makes the future look brighter. That's what makes possibility. What are we going to make possible? I'm going to name a few things. There are lots of them. And there are a couple of beautiful things that we can expect in the next, maybe let's think big. Let's think the next year. Yes. Okay? The next year, the Great Bear Rainforest. Logging is going to be reduced to a sustainable rate in the Great Bear Rainforest. First Nations are going to have well-being in their communities there. Clayoquot Sound, First Nations are going to be safeguarding their territory, and the intact valleys are going to be safeguarded into the future. We're going to have old growth forests are going to be part of a rational climate policy so that we reduce the carbon emissions from logging too much old growth forest. That's what we're going to get with our imagination. We will have enough forests conserved so that we can protect the variety of species across, not just in coastal British Columbia, but in the interior as well. It's about half. That's what the science says. We need to protect about half of the forests of British Columbia to sustain it. And we will end this ridiculous jobs versus the environment paradigm that has been foisted upon us. We will end that because we will value every stick of wood that is logged. It will be a sustainable rate of logging. We will put value on every stick that's logged. We will not be like a country that are often called third world, where we export raw logs. Other people get the jobs, and what do we get? The clear cuts. That is not us. That is not what we imagine. We imagine something much better, and you people have the strength of imagination. Go out, seed it in the world, and we're going to change things. Thank you so much for being here today.
Our next speaker just finished a tour to bring together environmentalists, forestry workers, First Nations, business owners, people across the spectrum. Essentially, it's the same thing that we've been doing, but he's been going from community to community on the BC Forest Tour. It's Eric Hamilton Smith, the campaigns officer of the largest public sector union in British Columbia, the BC Government Employees Union.
Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to be here today. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to come here on behalf of the 65,000 direct government and extended public sector workers who I work for. Our members, I don't want you to confuse, when I say government, I don't want you to confuse with the current government that we have in power right now. The people that I represent are regular, salt of the earth, hard-working people. They're nurses, they're corrections officers, community social services workers, and they are direct government workers. They're scientists in the Ministry of Environment. I represent the members, the men and women of the Forest Service. Well, what's left of the Forest Service anyways. You see, for the last 10 years, more than 10 years, the BC Liberals have hacked and slashed the budget of the Ministry of Forest. They've cut the staff and hollowed out the once proud Forest Service, taking 1,000 staff positions away. It is shameful. The result is that we've lost our eyes and ears in the forest. We don't have enough boots on the ground to make sure that the major logging companies are operating in a way that is sustainable. We don't have enough boots on the ground to make sure that the logging companies are paying their fair share for our natural resources, to make sure that we're getting the stumpage revenue, that's the resource tax that we collect on our timber that's harvested. I'm going to throw a couple of numbers out there and you can tell me what you think. In 2010, we brought in $320 million in stumpage revenue. This is compared to 2000, when we brought in $1.3 billion. That is a difference of more than $1 billion in revenue that we are not getting. Now, a lot of that has to do with the mountain pine beetle, but I want to say something on that too. We've known about the mountain pine beetle for decades. We've known about climate change for decades. We used to have people working in the Ministry of Forests who are working on exactly that problem of anticipating how and where climate change and pestilence would affect our natural resources. And rather than investing and ramping up investments in research, silviculture, reforestation, and climate change mitigation efforts, this government did precisely the opposite and hacked and slashed the budget to the Ministry of Forests and cut the very team of people that was working on providing solutions to climate change and mountain pine beetle. That's not just shameful, that's stupid, in my opinion.
Their values aren't values.
And the people of BC are the real victims, and our forests are the real victims. You see, because of all the mountain pine beetle timber that has been affected, the attack has reduced the harvestable timber that we have available to support our forest economy, to support our forest communities, and good family supporting jobs. We have lost so much already, and a lot of that could have been preventable. Now this is just increased pressure to log old growth forests, to log into parks. And we heard about that last year when there was a leaked memo from the Liberal government showing that they were planning to go into parks, showing that they were planning on going into protected areas and logging ancient old growth. And that is fundamentally wrong, and I speak for the 65,000 members of the BCGU when I say that that is wrong. Now, as Ken said, I've been touring around the province, and we've been doing this for a couple of years now. And let me tell you that from Campbell River to Castlegar to Mackenzie, I've been hearing the same thing. People in this province are mad as... Sorry, these children. Mad as heck. They're mad as heck. They feel as though the government has abandoned them.
They have.
They feel the government has abandoned the health of our forests, the ecological integrity of our ancient old-growth forests and the wilderness that it supports.
They have.
They have abandoned multiple forest values, including spiritual importance, held by our First Nations.
Yeah.
Shame.
Shame! We need to be more responsible of who we're voting in.
Absolutely. We need to be more responsible of who we're voting in. They've been in power for way too long. They've cut way too much. Now, what's left of our Forest Service, they're actually being told, these are the men and women on the ground, making sure that stumpage is paid, making sure that logging is done sustainably. They are told, more often than not, to look the other way, to give industry a free ride, to treat them with kid gloves. You don't have to look at the forest, they're told. The forest industry regulates itself. What a joke. They call it professional reliance, but we all know better. What this equates to is industry self-regulation, and we all know how well that works. Now, we can't blame the corporations. They have a duty, a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders to maximize profit and to minimize costs. Part of minimizing cost means avoiding paying stumpage wherever possible. And they do this. There's a number of practices that they use to avoid paying their fair share of resource revenue, and I'm here to tell you that that is wrong. It's wrong for so many reasons. We need that revenue to fund vital reforestation efforts. We have 2 million hectares of not satisfactorily restocked forest lands in desperate need of reforestation. Now, I don't want to come here with a doom and gloom story. It's not all bad news. The good news is there's an election on May 14th. Where we had the chance to voice our concerns and throw this government out. There's also an abundance of forest policy solutions that have been put forth by many of the environmental organizations here today, and by one Ben Parfit of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. Does everybody know Ben? Yes. Now, Ben was instrumental in breaking the story about this government's recent attempt to give away our public forest resources. with those amendments to the Forest Act hidden away in miscellaneous Bill 8.
Yes, thank you.
But thanks to the efforts of Ben Parfit, as well as the environmental and labor movements, we shut that down. You shut that down. Now Ben tells us that it's not all hopeless. With minor policy changes, we can bring back tens of thousands of high-paying, value-added forest sector jobs. And with some modest investments, we can create 5,000 jobs in reforestation. The solutions are there. The passion is clearly here. Now let's get to work and make sure that we do the right thing on May 14th. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is actually here in Victoria, the one who really built the ancient forest movement through the 80s and the 90s. And she stays active in these campaigns. And she's actually the one who, I understand, recruited Valerie Langer to become an activist in the early days. We have Vicky Husband, who's all-around activist here.
I just got the sign that said 1 minute left. I think one of the messages that I'm hearing today is that we all must stand together. We have the opportunity with people power to do that. Working with communities, working with First Nations, working with all of us. That's what we have to do, because the government has gone off the rails in so many ways. And I really echo what Eric just said, but it's so incredible what's happened out on the ground, and I've been out on the ground a lot more lately. Our forests are totally mismanaged. There is nobody home. There's nobody on the ground, and it's not the fault of, I'm hearing it province-wide, and I'm with people like Bob Simpson, the independent MLA, whom I worked with very closely to try and to stop Bill 8, as I did with Ben Parfit, who was just named, Anthony Britniff, and some other folks. We raised the profile and through social media. This was about privatizing most of the forests, the public forests in British Columbia. So that was a major victory this week. Now we want a public inquiry into all our forests and forest management. We want to bring back the laws to protect our forests. These forests belong to everyone, and particularly to First Nations. And we were just about to give them all away with the Liberal government. And that is not going to happen. And it's our work that will make the difference. And we can protect old growth. We're not talking about watersheds anymore. We're talking about stands of trees, like those incredible trees on Sonoma Island off Campbell River. A stand of 160 old-growth Douglas fir and some old red cedar. This is what we're down to. We're down to the remnants. And if we can't stop Timber West and that operation and Island Timberlands by Cathedral Grove and McLaughlin Ridge and near Port Alberni, what can we do? So we've got to stop the logging of old-growth forests. These are I used to say, no, we can't say no old-growth forest logging. This is 20, 30 years ago, and we couldn't say it then. But we can say it now because we're looking at a shattered landscape. Mismanagement, not providing the jobs it should, as Valerie Langer said. We could cut half and have more jobs. And if it were community forests and value-added operations, we can provide much more for we as citizens of British Columbia. Why do we ship the wood out and then ship it back in refined? You know, it's like shipping out unrefined oil, right? We shouldn't do that. We're shipping out jobs everywhere. We have an opportunity to make a real difference. But remember, these are the critical 2 months right now. We've got to raise all our voices. We must stand together. We can save these old-growth forests. We can change forest management in British Columbia. We can protect the environment. We can protect wildlife habitat. We're not doing any of those things right now. It's up to us. It always is. And we need your voices out there. And anything I can do, I'm just a free radical. I'm not associated with any organization anymore. I'm just out there for everyone, helping. This is a wonderful forest campaigner for the Sierra Club of British Columbia. He's done outstanding work in the Great Bear Rainforest, and I hope he's going to look farther, looking at all the forests of British Columbia, which is what we all must do. Thank you. And here's the end.
I would like to speak briefly about three numbers. The first number is 10. The second number is 300, and I keep the third number to the end. So the first number is about a 10% world. This is a title of an article by J.B. McKinnon. Here's a quote from the article. When seen through the lens of deep time, ours is a 10% world. This article is about the fact that if we look around us, if we look at our lands, oceans, plants and animals, in many cases what we see is that we have only about 10% of the biological richness that we once had left. Only about 10%. Of course, sometimes it's 25%, sometimes it's 5%. There are a few extreme examples. For example, in the Caribbean, there were once 900 million green sea turtles. Today, there are 300,000. So we live in a 10% world, and the problem is that often we don't know or we don't remember what we once had. It's called generational amnesia. We get used to things. We look around and we think that what we see is normal. We have to check our reality. We know that we have lost around 3/4 of the productive old-growth forests on Vancouver Island. It's hard to imagine, but imagine what the island was like once before. 100 years ago, an ocean of old-growth trees teeming with life, rivers boiling with salmon, forests teeming with bears, with cougars, with wolves. Our coast is still spectacularly rich, but biologically speaking, it's a long way downhill. So we have to ask ourselves, when are we going to change? When do we want to manage things differently? When are we going to stop cutting old growth? At 20%, at 10%, or at 5%? I can tell you what it looks like at 0% because I'm from Germany. And I can tell you it's no fun. There's no old growth left, and it's no fun to go for a walk in a plantation forest. Which leads me to my second number, 300. 300 years ago, the modern concept of sustainability got invented and developed in Germany by a German mining administrator. In 1713, this guy suggested, wait, maybe we should only cut as many trees as we are planting. That's 300 years ago. Unfortunately, it was a bit late at the time because all the ancient forests of Germany were already cut down when he made the suggestion. And today we are hearing everywhere that everything is sustainable. BC forestry is sustainable. The problem is that our forests are actually a three-dimensional thing. They are not a flat ecosystem like a cornfield. So it's really important to think about the three dimensions and to acknowledge that if we continue to convert old growth to second growth, it's not sustainable. Converting from older forests to younger forests leaves less for future generations, and we have to change. So, which leads me to my third number, but before I want to mention the biggest challenge we are faced with. Global warming is a planetary emergency, but here is a number of hope. The last number is 12. The world's plants, our forests are so productive, it's almost unimaginable, it's spectacular. Imagine the world's plants are absorbing and releasing, breathing in, breathing out, absorbing and releasing all the carbon contained in the atmosphere in 12 years. It's all going through the system in 12 years. And our plants, our forests are so productive. If we allow nature to grow back, if we restore our forests, we can help fighting global warming, we can restore and we can resequester huge amounts of carbon. But we have to start doing it now, because in a 10% world, we need 100% action. Please continue to fight for saving our environment, stand up, and thanks for being here.
We've got just the last minute speaker, actually, Eduardo Sousa, who is the forest campaigner for Greenpeace, biggest environmental group on earth. He's come, he worked hard for Clayoquot Sound, Great Bear Rainforest, and he's here to speak. Thank you very much.
I want to acknowledge that I am a guest here in the traditional territory of the Lekwungen people of the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations, and I thank them for allowing me to be here. And I want to thank all of you. It is so fantastic to see all of you out here. I have to say, in the work I do, a lot of it is like in meetings, it's online, it can be isolating sometimes, and there's nothing like being in communities and being in rallies like this to feel inspired and to keep going as well for the kind of work that we do, to continue with the passions that drive us to save what remains of old growth in this province. So I thank you all. And I thank also, of course, the Ancient Forest Alliance for bringing us all together here, and for Ken's undying, amazing energy. You just keep going, Ken, and so it goes without saying that we live in a very blessed land of great beauty and sacredness, and I'm grateful for those who help to keep it this way. And to me, what makes the land special, in addition to the First Nations who have inhabited the lands and waters and who acknowledge it through their languages and cultural practices, are old-growth forests and the established relationships that exist in these places. There's a preciousness, an almost palpable energy when you enter old-growth areas. So we support the AFA's province-wide efforts to protect old-growth forests in a way that also supports forestry jobs. Indeed, that is also what has driven us at Greenpeace, and myself personally as well. I've been working on the Great Bear Rainforest and Clayoquot Sound campaigns for the past 4 years. I would have never thought that this Portuguese immigrant kid who grew up in the inner city of Toronto would have found himself all these years later on the West Coast working to protect such special places, and doing so in a way that does not exclude the right of people to make a living, and especially in a way that respects the rights and title of First Nations, for the lands that we speak of are unceded traditional territories of the many nations. Greenpeace's international work, and some of you perhaps may know that Greenpeace got its start here on the West Coast in Vancouver back in 1971, and so we've expanded around the world now. But our international forests work in Brazil, Indonesia, the Congo, pretty well evolved out of our work in Clayoquot Sound and in the Great Bear Rainforest. And our work, of course, is our work with the First Nations, other environmental organizations, citizen activists, and also industry. It started here for us. And so what happens here matters, and it matters around the world. It's very important what is going on here. So we've been told by industry executives that the economics of keeping raw logs from being exported doesn't add up. Well, I say the global economy that is driving this sort of thinking and a race to the bottom doesn't add up. We see it all around us. We see the kind of tumult that is happening around the world, socially, environmentally, certainly in terms of climate change. It doesn't add up. Things have to change. And so in a world that is really beginning to feel the effects of climate change, we need to do things differently, we need to do things wisely, intelligently, and with compassion. We need to shift to an ecological economics of the 21st century based on resiliency, such as producing needed products close to home. And in the case of forest products, this needs to be based on sustainable second growth forestry and developing second or value-added jobs in the sector. An ecological economics is needed that's based on ways of governing and managing the land and waters, rooted in the understanding that we, in all our actions, are nested in such ecosystems. An ecological economics that is based on equity and social justice, that encompasses the rights of forestry workers, but also the rights and title of those who have stewarded these lands for millennia. For me, cultural diversity and biodiversity are inseparable, and so to have true conservation of old-growth forests, I feel it's essential to support First Nations communities and their aspirations. I feel they and other communities close to the land are the stewards of the land, and conservation is ensured by listening and working beside them, side by side, and truly, truly listening.
Yes.
As we head then into a critical provincial election, these are really important considerations to think about in choosing who you want to see govern the province. There's much at Old Growth, for those of you who've been blessed in going into Old Growth forests, there is so much that these places have to teach us. And it's humbling, and frankly for me, also deeply spiritual as well. And it's really shifted my consciousness in the way I work and the way I think, which is shifting more towards working with my heart, at the same time trying to work with others in various different ways.
Good will prevail.
So let's join in, let's hear each other's stories and proceed on the basis of compassion. Let's not forget compassion. On the basis of reciprocity and respect. And as Idle No More, as that amazing movement has shown me, there's more that joins us than there is that keeps us apart. Thank you. Yeah!